Thank you, everyone. I hope you can all hear me all right. I'm really delighted and thrilled that we are being able to host this webinar on such a critical issue of international sharing, knowledge exchange and importance within and beyond national borders. An issue that really does transcend all false divides between us, something that is so important to everyone. So I am Emma Maudsley. I'm the director of the India-UK Development Partnership Forum. We're funded by the FCDO, but we are completely independent. And it's my honour, I'm not going to say very much, but it's my honour to hand over to Mr. Sanjoy Hazarika, who will introduce our very esteemed speakers. Sanjoy, thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Professor Maudsley. And I'd like to appreciate the support of the India-UK Partnership Office at Cambridge University for helping to organize global perspectives on RTI from insights from South Asia and Africa. I hope this is going to be a very interactive program, and I look forward to it, and I'm sure you do. I know it's the end of the week, and many of you will have been in many Zoom or Microsoft Word seminars, team seminars, and you may be getting a bit tired of it, but this is important, I think, not just because of the panelists, but because of the issue and the pressures that are growing on information, freedom of information, and the need for authenticity of information at a time of the proliferation of fake news and prejudice. Our first speaker will be Venkatesh Nayak, who heads the RTI, Right to Information team in the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, of where I'm also working. But a little bit about RTI itself. I mean, for instance, India's RTI trajectory journey is older than the law, which is 15 years old. It's instituted in the constitution of the country, but it's constantly being challenged at different levels. We note that a couple of days ago, a parliamentary committee has been now asked to review the work of the Central Information Commission and the State Information Commissions. And that has drawn reactions from those who believe very much in the need for transparency through RTI. Each country that is represented here has a unique story and a unique set of challenges as far as access to information and the law about freedom of information goes. As a journalist myself of some years, I note that increasing numbers of media professionals are taking to RTI to ferret out facts, which may be inconvenient, sometimes at great risk to themselves. And it has become also a tool for investigative journalism. Now, RTI, I think, is both a barometer and an enabler of transparency and good governance, and that is perhaps why some states are wary of it. Today's panel will speak to a couple of questions that I will put to them, to each of them. The first is about really, these are interconnected and they can speak to different ones that I'll pose, is the journey and how an idea became a law, which is so extensively used in many countries of the world. The second revolves around the mandate, and not just in terms of demand and supply, but also how some of you, each one of you on the panel has been deeply involved in the rolling out of the implementation and the development, as it were, of the law in your own country and in other countries. CHRI, of course, has enabled right to information uh, access, laws, and implementation, capacity building in numerous countries of the Commonwealth. Um, and I'd like at the start, therefore, to give the floor to Venkatesh Nayak, who is, as I said, the head of Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative's Right to Information, Access to Information team, but also is one of the best known faces, voices, and mobilizers around RTI in India and abroad. Because CHRI has embedded training in RTI and in numerous countries, as I said, in the Commonwealth and outside of it, including Afghanistan, and help with the rollout of laws, processes, and capacity building. So over to you, Venkat. Thank you. And you can take whichever of that question that you want to answer. Essentially, how, and your own, perhaps the role of CHR and your own role in that.
Very briefly put, the history of the right to information movement in India can be traced back to 1975, when the Supreme Court of India, in a landmark judgment, recognized that every citizen has the right to know everything that is done in a public way by government and its functionaries. However, for the law that gives effect to this right to know to be put in place took much longer. It came about only in 2005 across the country, although 1997 onwards, at least 8 states had passed access to information laws applicable to agencies under their jurisdiction. The impetus for a nationwide law on the right to information actually came from a variety of sources. Before the last bit that actually led to the sort of people's movement, which is the grassroots level movement. Very often, the contributions of a variety of sectors of civil society prior to the issue becoming a grassroots level movement's issue are neglected. In fact, environmental activists, people working for the rehabilitation and relief packages of people displaced by large developmental projects, consumer rights activists, these were all the sectors that actually demanded greater and greater transparency in public affairs, particularly in government's actions. However, the grassroots level movement is what really gave the fillip to this demand for a strong and effective right to information law across the country. And the theaters of that grassroots level movement can be traced to Rajasthan, where people who actually were unlettered, but they were the most and adversely affected by corruption, demanded a law on transparency, particularly in relation to the spending of taxpayer money. Similarly, another anti-corruption movement involving hundreds, thousands of people from Maharashtra also demanded similar laws on transparency. So this is when the government was, in a way, compelled to sit up and understand what this demand was all about. And thankfully, we did have at that point of time in 2004, 2005, an enlightened leadership that was willing to listen to civil society voices and take action on them. And we had the right to information law being put together, not by government, because there was an exercise earlier which was stillborn law, because Parliament passed a law but never made the necessary subordinate legislation to implement it. However, a new dispensation took over after elections in 2004, and a committee was constituted to advise the government, particularly the political parties that formed the government, on delivering the promises that they had made in their election manifestos. So a common minimum program had been developed. So one of the first tasks that was taken up by the civil society advisory group was to put together a progressive, effective right to information draft bill. The government took it over, and as is typical of many other governments in other countries, a watered down version was tabled in Parliament in December that year. But thankfully, again, the wisdom of the leading lights in the government ruled the day. Several rounds of public consultations were held, and eventually, perhaps for the first time in the history of India, a bill that was tabled by the treasury benches, by the government, actually went through more than 140 amendments, all based on inputs received from people working in different walks of life who had engaged with the parliamentary committee. And in May 2005, the law got passed. June onwards, the implementation process began. October 12th onwards, people were able to file information requests formally and demand access to information. The experience over the last 15 years has been one of uh, empowerment, I should say, first and foremost, where people are able to dialogue with the administration and public authorities at different levels, from the grassroots level administration right up to policy making levels, using pen and paper. That has been, in my humble opinion, the biggest achievement of the right to information law. People asking questions about how government made decisions or why it did not make any certain decisions on a certain issue, its omissions, manner of spending public money, uh, and various other actions, particularly those which involve discretion. These were increasingly questioned, not out of any kind of animosity, but primarily from the point of view of demanding greater transparency and fixing accountability. So the experience has been a great one. Now, CHRI, the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, where I work, was part of the civil society effort to draft the right to information law. My then colleague was a part of the civil society drafting committee. At that point of time, I had not begun working in the area of right to information, so I joined the right to information program of work around September in 2004, and it was actually a very opportune time. The bill was being discussed in parliament, in government first, before it was tabled in parliament. So we were contacted for a lot of inputs from the draftspersons within government for examples of how different aspects of the law were dealt with, be it the application process or the appeals process or the manner of giving information, the fee related provisions, or the external adjudicatory and oversight body called the Information Commission. How did these how were these things fashioned in other countries? So by then we had accumulated a wealth of knowledge about the implementation of such laws in Commonwealth countries and some non-Commonwealth countries like Mexico and Ireland. So we were able to feed that information into the drafting process. Eventually, when the bill was placed before a parliamentary committee, after it was tabled in parliament, it was placed before the committee for detailed deliberations. And our organization was invited twice to make representations on key aspects for, related to improvement of various provisions of the law. So a lot of that has actually been very well documented. And in fact, 2 years ago, the chairperson of that parliamentary standing committee released a book uh, which contained a blow-by-blow account of all the developments that took place from the tabling of the bill in parliament to the final approval that parliament gave. And mind you, when the opposition had actually walked out of parliament because of some other political agenda that they were pursuing. So the law got passed, and after that, CHRI has been involved in the process of developing training programs, advising government at the central and at the state level for developing implementation plans of action, particularly in the context of improving what is called suo motu or proactive information disclosure. More recently, 2012 onwards, we have been looking at the manner of implementation of the right to information law across various jurisdictions. Please remember there are at least about 37 jurisdictions across the country which implement this law, each with their own set of rules, their own information, and at least 28 information commissions. So we've looked at their performance. We also use the right to information law to expand the boundaries of transparency by deliberately asking for information that government has not yet already placed in the public domain, but which we believe must be in the public domain for people to be able to hold government responsible and accountable. So the journey so far has been a very challenging one. Accessing information is not always easy. Responses do not come in with as much ease as one would expect. Certain kinds of information, particularly where the government is likely, or rather government thinks that disclosure of certain kinds of information may cause it embarrassment. They would like to hide it, but then the litigation goes on all the way to the Information Commission. And to its credit, we must say that at least in some of those cases, the Central Information Commission has taken very progressive steps, and it has directed disclosure of information. There are several such cases. There are thorns as well. There are many implementation problems, but those challenges are perhaps we can take up during the next round of discussions. I think for the time being, I will stop here and yield the floor to my other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. You actually finished sort of 3 minutes before scheduled time. So that gives me the chance to ask you a quick question before
Yes.
we move to our next panelist, which is what has been more challenging for you, developing the practice of RTI and enabling that across, say, across a geography as disparate as diverse as India, where people have different problems and challenges, or has it been to extract the information from government? What has been the challenge?
So if I were to make a laundry list of challenges that plague the implementation process, at the very top of that list, I would place the reluctance of the bureaucracy to change its mindset, which is steeped in the practice of sharing information with people on a need-to-know basis. And I would be only holding the bureaucracy responsible for this. I should complete the circle. The political elite as well, particularly elected representatives. There aren't many of them who are champions or votaries of transparency. We have had situations in Parliament, and I could give that one example. I think this was about 2 or 3 years ago. Um, the right to information became a subject matter of debate, and we had a member of the opposition, but he said something quite negative about the fact that even a rickshaw puller could file an information request and ask information about high policy making processes within government. And very strangely, at that point of time, the government representative, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the prime minister who was responding. He actually said, yes, people use 10 rupees as the application fee and put in a request to find out satellites which our Apex Space Research Organization puts in orbit. Fact that the law allows people who he thinks, or at that point of time at least, he thought that they had no business asking such information. And ironically, that very day, before the gentleman attended Parliament, in the morning, he actually was present at an event where another satellite was launched by that very same agency. And what was the purpose of that satellite? The purpose of the satellite was to provide services to all citizens based in South Asian countries. And the money that was used was from the Indian taxpayer. So what is wrong in an Indian taxpayer asking information about that particular project or any other satellite related project? That is the whole purpose of the transparency law. It's not just about people asking information in which they have a direct stake or which concerns their personal affairs directly. So this lack of grounding in the philosophy and praxis of RTI is the biggest challenge. Other problems also remain, like for example, the poor state of records management. That's what affects disclosure of information, particularly information that is 4 or 5 years old or older. We also have a huge challenge with the kind of individuals who are appointed to the oversight bodies under the Indian law called the Indian Information Commissions. Very often, anecdotal experience and sometimes sample-based studies also show that not all of them are very positively disposed towards championing the regime of transparency which the law seeks to establish. So there are several other challenges, but let me end by saying that the biggest support, the biggest foundation, the bedrock of the entire RTI regime is the demand side. And I will just end with one bit of statistic. Conservatively, we have estimated that in any given year of late, between 5 to 5.5 million information requests are submitted across the country with various public authorities, starting from the Office of the President down to the rural local self-governing body, which we call panchayats. That's a conservative estimate. Now, there are friends here, particularly would like to point out our former Information Commissioner, Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, who's participating in this event. Now, they are more liberal in their estimates, and they believe that it could the figures could be in the range of 8 million. Now, for any country, 8 million information requests is a huge number. I do not think any other country in the world can total up such figures as far as the use of their own right to information laws are concerned. So I think if the law survives today and if it is vibrant, if it is active, despite all the challenges, it is because of the enormous support that the law derives from people's interest in making use of this law, not for their personal purposes all the time, but most of the time on matters of public interest, on matters of public affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat, for that additional set of remarks. And it's a good point to pick up on and actually go to our other panelists, Kishale Jayawardene Pinto and Shireen Xavier. Kishale is, of course, one of Sri Lanka's best known fearless human rights campaigners, but also a very senior lawyer and constitutional expert. And she is also a very powerful columnist who is read very extensively and a member of the first and continuing Central Information Commission of Sri Lanka. Shireen Xavier is a filmmaker and human rights activist who has been long in this field. She leads what's called the Social Architecture Group, which holds governments to account. And she was Canada's Red Cross Society head in India for several years. So I'd like you to look at the question of the challenges that Sri Lanka has faced, first in rolling out the law, and then engaging with it and making sure it remains on that despite the difficulties that the Commission and those who wish to use it have faced. So over to you.
Thank you, Sanjoy. Yes, actually, and this is a point that I make quite frequently. Sri Lanka, in contrast to India, did not start its RTI movement really from the grassroots. It was part of a broader campaign or a broader plank of media law reform. So it was very intimately tied to the media as such from the 1990s. And in that plank of law reform, we had the abolition of criminal defamation, we had the enactment of a right to information law, and then we had the enactment of contempt of court law. And as a constitutional lawyer and as a columnist from that period, really, our focus was to try and bring about an environment where citizens would be empowered to collaborate in governance. And irrespective of all governments and the state of Sri Lanka, which, as many of you know, has been very complicit in the way it has suppressed freedom of information and expression for decades due to conflict both in the north and in the south of the country. Our focus was really to broaden and widen the parameters of freedom of information and expression. So it was a very media-oriented, media-focused dynamic that prevailed. In the 1990s, we had the first group and the first committee that looked into bringing about a law on right to information in Sri Lanka. And in 2003, the first committee in that regard sat chaired by the Prime Minister, and I served on that committee as an advisor at that point. And thereafter, the journey of RTI was very checkered. Though we presented and we prepared a bill and it went to Parliament, at that point of enactment, the President dissolved the Parliament and the bill lapsed into the corridors of obscurity, as it were. Then we had a time where nothing worked in Sri Lanka because of the intensification of the conflict. We also had a president who said that for any information that you want, you can come to me and get the information. So it was a very negative period during those particular 2 decades or so that we went through. Now, what happened in 2015 was that when the government came in on a plank of opening up the parameters of critique of the state, as it were, freedom of information was a main campaign promise of theirs. And even though very soon the government itself was in a way besieged by a major critique about its own functioning, they could not really withdraw on the promise they had made on enacting an information law. So in 2015, a new committee was constituted, where again I was asked to serve on that. And by that time, we had the benefit of several years of the law functioning in India. We had the benefit of several Commonwealth experiences with information law. So we decided at that point that if we are enacting a law in Sri Lanka, we should have a law that would be to the best extent in consonance with modern standards and modern principles and modern best practice. So actually what really transpired thereafter, and this is why Sri Lanka theoretically, the Sri Lankan law is ranked quite high, is that quite contrary to all expectations, and I came into it as a very cynical lawyer who was not expecting a good draft to really be presented to Parliament. But contrary to all expectations at the point, almost 99.9% of what we wanted came through on the floor of the House. So in 2016, we had a good law that was passed in the House, unanimously, by the way. No parliamentarian objected to this. And then came the challenge of putting the law into practice, into implementation. So for us, really, in the drafting of the law, one major focus and one major concern was that over and above everything else, we didn't want the public service to be seen as it was the enemy, as it were. We wanted the public service to look on the right to information law as a collaborative partner in the process. Because for me in particular, I realized that coming from the perspective or the viewpoint of a crusader or an activist, as it were, if you end up antagonizing the public service, you're really not going to get very far with the law. So we tried to make the law as fair as possible to the public service to which it was directed, and also we wanted to promote the principle of equity. So it's a public service, it's the corporate sector within certain parameters, and the non-governmental sector. All three were governed or are governed by Sri Lanka's information regime. And the second principle that actually motivated us at that point was that we wanted to very, very strongly emphasize the importance of an independent oversight body. A body that had not only independence in the appointment of its commissioners, but also very far-reaching powers in working or implementing the right to information law. So unlike many RTI laws in the region and elsewhere, Sri Lanka's commissioners, right to information commissioners, come through a process of nomination of the commission members by civil society organizations, by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, and by the Editors Guild of Sri Lanka. For example, I serve as the nominee of the Editors Guild of Sri Lanka, which is comprised of Tamil, Sinhalese, and English mainstream media. Now, if that particular nomination process was not there, I don't think we would have got a commission that really could function independently, as it were. The second part of that process was that the commission has, in terms of its own powers, very, very far-reaching powers. So, for example, unlike the other commissions, we have the power to determine the fees on which information can be released to consumers and to requesters. We have the power to go to court against any individual or any information officer who violates the Information Act. The Act itself has the power of penal sentence imposed for those who violate the right to information law. And all these stem from, for example, in my case, it stemmed from years of practice of the law where I realized the points at which impunity operates, the points at which state officers are able to escape from the consequences of their actions. So the law itself has plugged all these gaps really in the implementation, so that it became quite difficult when it started getting implemented for public officers to escape from consequences of implementation, because it was drafted so tightly and with a lot of regard to the nitty-gritty of it. The broad scope of the law was very important, but the nitty-gritty, the devil was in the details, really, as far as we were concerned. So that was how the first challenges really took place in implementation. I think looking back, we were appointed 5-year terms, and our terms are really coming to an end next year. The experience has been extremely positive, very powerful. For me, the biggest joy, really, if I would use the term, is to see people using the law to question the state. Now, in Sri Lanka, which has been racked by conflict for decades, in the south between the Sinhalese and the Sri Lankan state, and the north between the Tamils and the Sri Lankan state, we have had, at a point, we were the second highest in the world in terms of disappearances after Iraq. the very notion of questioning the state was very, very, very problematic because you could be killed, you could be disappeared, you know. So here, as sitting on the commission as well, to find villagers coming and sort of questioning a very senior public officer face to face and saying, why did you not do it in this way? Why did you not give me my information? Why have you treated me like this? Was a very, very moving experience. And one positive factor was again that though Sri Lanka's RTI law did not come through the grassroots and came through the media initiative, as it were, it has been extremely pleasant for me to see that the last 4 years, the people who have used it most have been the citizens, have been the ordinary people, not the media and not the so-called, as we call them, the people who are already empowered in the city, so on and so forth. It's been the rural villager, the people who are disempowered, who have actually used the law to pursue and get justice really in their search. Now, many of the times, and this is
I'm just wondering, Keshali, I'm just wondering whether Shireen can come into the picture literally, and whether she would like to.
I will take it. Sorry, let me finish my sentence. Let me finish my sentence. So what I wanted to say was that really in many of the cases that we have seen at grassroots level and at the commission, the issue doesn't stop with the release of information. So it goes to beyond that, where in fact the grievance and the focus and at the center of the problem gets redressed. So that's a very important development as far as the working of the law is concerned. Yeah.
So I will jump in, we were talking about the demand and supply. So I will kind of come into it, from the demand side, because I am actually.
I think you'll have to speak in closer to the mic. You're a bit muted. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjoy. And I will speak more about, where after operationalizing of the RTI law in Sri Lanka, that was in February of 2017. And Keshali, you touched upon, because Sri Lanka being the second largest, having the highest number of disappearances. One of the first RTI requests were mothers actually going to police station, asking for the whereabouts about the children, and whether they were looking for documentation, because those police stations, this was an incident that happened in particular that was predominantly featured as well. For the first one to go in asking for that information. So again, here in Sri Lanka, from the demand side, if you look at it, it is very much of an empowering tool. People are using this. Not just, as you said, just not getting the information, but it is also we are looking at it from that empowering tool as well. But at the same time, it was also interesting, Keshali, because it was new to all. It was new to the supply side and it was new to the demand side. For example, even the government or the public authorities, the law is new. And for the citizens, the law is new. So it's sort of in a way that the citizens as well as the public authorities, they all actually work together to actually demystify this highly rated, sort of the promising law. That is basically what happened in Sri Lanka. And to some extent, even though it was not actually, this is not a law that stemmed or came from the bottom up. It actually had the media, the elite, it was basically a law that was designed in Colombo. However, after that, the way when you go into sort of the applicability of the law and the people who are actually getting information, it skipped a step and just went right into grassroots. I think that is sort of thing that I will say in Sri Lanka why it's working and why people also sort of, a good example why RTI law was not touched in the recent past is something that we always ask this question. It's because it's been popularized to some extent by and people are actually have taken the ownership of owning the law and owning the act. So that is something that I would say. And then also sometimes it's also very good to actually throw in certain examples or sort of case studies. Let's say, I remember the eastern part of Sri Lanka, where one of our team members actually, because what we do also as the social architects, it's a civil society organization, from the beginning, since its operationalization in 2017, we as an institution also sort of taken on that kind of a principle that we are not going to become RTI activists. We are going to create a community of RTI practitioners. So instead of creating one here, one there, and then people kind of say, it's the community. If you want, you empower the community to request information. So that is a strategy actually that had worked in Sri Lanka, or I can say worked with the team that we work with and the community, the villages that we work with. For example, let's say, I was just last night, I was going through some RTI application, and it was quite it was a startling sort of revelation, I must say, is a bulk that cost, because someone had from a community in the East, they have applied for a request asking for how much the local government has spent on the street light. So doing the calculation in 2016, the government, that local body had spent for a bulk 1,600. Whereas in 2017, it was 1,200 to 300. But in 2018, it was 800 rupees. And in 2019, it was actually 352 rupees, the actual price of the bulk where you and I buy it. So to some extent, this is basically the proof is in the pudding. And from that one piece of paper that we got that information, the institutional transparency, when you promote institutional transparency, what is the impact that is having on this whole corruption? So we can go on about it. And at the same time, definitely, there are sort of the officers don't want to give out information, and then there are all the other. It's not like everything is a great picture, but at least it is going in the right direction. So that is what I can say from at this point from the side of the demand side as well.
No, that's really important, and I have actually a question for both of you, and you can decide who takes it on, because I really like this resonance of the community of practitioners rather than a grouping of activists, because I think that is a learning from your experience. I think every country that has brought in a law that works for transparency has a huge learning to share with other countries. It's not as if India started it or started something, so we have a lot to give. Yes, but we have a lot to learn from Sri Lanka, from other countries. So I would, this very powerful story that you started with, that mothers were coming to police stations, mothers were filing applications, petitions seeking, where is my son, where are my children? That must have impacted you, each of you individually, apart from the fact that you've been fighting for rights of people and so on. But to have this, how did you respond to this?
Okay, so this, for example, the Patiklo case where the mothers going to the police station, the mothers were basically earlier, if the mothers are going to the police station looking for their children, they're always chased away. Okay, why are you coming? And then they also won't even imagine or think about going there. But with this law, they said, okay, I can actually, this is the first time I have some kind of tool in my hand to question an authority, and especially a police force. It's the same way. There was another example in Kilinochchi as well. This is where the war ended, and that place where the community, the women requested, because they all lost their jewelry, and then for some reason they knew that those they are with the government, from the LTT, the government has taken those the assets and especially the jewelry. So they requested information saying that we would like to have our jewelry back, and just to give us the list that they actually have in their possession. So normally in a military, in a completely militarized area, nobody will ever go to the military and ask for some information, They will only say, go and plead, saying that please release my children, like, please release so and so, all of that. Whereas when they apply, like, file this information request, the army actually went to these people's houses, their own homes, and then asked, okay, we don't know what to do. Where did you get this information? What about this law? Can someone actually give, like, tell us about this law? So the shifting of that power relation, that is, to me, I mean, actually, that was one of the benefits, and especially when we are talking about the whole gender relationship and then how the women are impacted. It is amazing, Shali, because that is what I will, like, flag it as a like, women's rights activist or someone who has been working in this field for a long time. That was very powerful, I must say.
I think that same dialogue, the dialogue aspect of it, Sanjoy, was very apparent. Now, in the first example that was cited by Shireen on the women, the mothers going and asking where the sons were, see, what happened was they went with copies of the Tamil Language Act in their hands, right, to the police stations. And these police stations in the north are normally funded or normally staffed by Sinhalese young police officers who are just gone and put there by the government, who don't know the Tamil language, who's got no idea about the dynamics of the north in any sense. And when, in this instance, his mothers, 15 mothers, went with the Tamil Language Act to the police stations and started asking them, these police officers said, look, we can't read Tamil. You have to explain to us what this act is all about. We've heard very generally, it was passed by parliament, everybody's talking about, we don't know what it means, And the Tamil mothers, in whatever little Sinhala they knew, were explaining in Sinhalese to these Sinhalese police officers what this act was all about. So it was a dialogue again there, So in a country like Sri Lanka, where communities have been driven apart by political demagoguery for decades, and they've been pushed into little corners of language, ethnicity, race, whatever as the case may be, right to information has come as a unifying, binding factor across the country, from the north to the south, because many of the issues they file RTI on are very common to each community. So when a community in the south, in the extreme south of Sri Lanka, in Matara, asks the government what has happened to, for example, the electricity given to our villagers, and they see the northerners asking the same thing, they realize, look, there's more to it than language that divides you or politicians that divide you. So there is quite a sort of I think it's even more than empowering, it's a very reconciliatory, very dialogue fostering process that has started in many of these cases, which is very, very, very positive for me.
Yeah, in fact, we'll come back to that during the discussion, this emphasis on dialogue and empowering of all communities, not just the empowerment of a community, but gender relations change, the relationship between the forces, security forces, and the people change. But I'm also, intrigued by this opportunity of what can I say, unifying through sharing information. And one last point before we go to Esther is really if not dismantling, but challenging and engaging with instruments of impunity by opening up the process that you both spoke of, the word dialogue, conversation that is so critical. We'll now move to another part of the world, to Ghana, to Africa, to Esther Hulu. Esther is the RTI program officer in CHRI's Africa office. She is based in Accra, in Ghana, and for many years, shoulder to shoulder with others in Ghana, in CHR and outside of CHR, has been at the heart of a remarkable coalition called the RTI Coalition to bring the RTI law for over 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. And she also, of course, has specialization in not just access to information, RTI, but also in access to justice and the whole area of police reforms. So she's been at this, at the heart of this. And Esther, what I would like you to do, if it's possible, is just pick up on, for instance, Sri Lanka, it's now 5 years almost since the law was passed. The Information Commission was created. Your Information Commission came into place, I think, in the law came into place in 2019, last year. And I remember being at the parliament when there was a select committee meeting and people were invited to give their comments, which was really remarkable that you have people from outside the country coming in and sharing their views, and people listen to us with good grace and patience. So I'd just like to get a sense from you on how the campaign, because it was a campaign which led to the law, campaign led by CSOs. In the case of India, it was a campaign led from the ground, from the field, which was then metamorphosed into a campaign by CSOs and so on. And in Sri Lanka, it was a different narrative. So just talk a little bit about that and how you're handling the challenges of rolling it out.
Okay, thank you, Sanjoy. Okay, so talking about the campaign by CSOs and a little bit about the journey. For Ghana, access to information law journey started with some few elites, so lawyers, journalists, and therefore, because of these few people and where the people they are standing for, it became a bit of a challenge when even the CSOs took over to push this agenda forward, because at the early stages, the idea was that this is something for the media. And therefore, everything that we're trying to push that is for the general public became a challenge, because the idea was that this is something for the media, and therefore the media have a lot of freedom in Ghana, so there's no need to expedite process on this to get this passed, because they are going to use it against us, the authorities anyway. But then for CSOs, like Sandra rightly said, before even the RTI coalition came in, the RTI bill actually, the first bill was actually drafted by a CSO organization called the IEA, that's the Institute for Economic Affairs. So because a CSO started it, it was easier to get other CSOs to come on board to push for this agenda. But then for CHRI, how we came in is because as you all may know, access to information is one of our key areas. So it was easier for CHRI to take the role to coordinate or to bring the CSOs on one platform to push for this agenda. But then bringing the CSOs together again, now the challenge is how to push forward. And as I've said, because the initial process was more like it's something for the media, governments, the legislature, or the authority that are supposed to lead this process were not forthcoming, because the notion that it's for the media but not for the people. But then we also ensure that as we are engaging government, we also brought in the people, because like I said, because we know that it's for the people, we realize the need for the people themselves to demand for it, because government was not actually ready for it right from the beginning. From the discourse that was going on, from articles that were flying around and all that, you could see that government wasn't ready for it. Although this find its roots, the law find its roots in our 1992 Constitution, Article 21(1)(f), that states that all persons shall have the right to information subject to qualifications that are necessary in a democratic society. So therefore, some of these arguments right from the beginning was the fact that the constitutional provision was very vague, and therefore there was a need for a law to elaborate this provision. But then government was also not ready to come up with any law in that area. So for CSOs, we were left on our own to lead in every stages of the way, every stage. So like I said, IEA supported with drafting the first draft, and then the coalition led by CHRI took it up, trying to refine it in such a way that bringing out comments, memorandums, and all that to submit to government to, better the content that we have now. Because government took the first draft that was done by the CSO, and then nothing much was done about it and was just running with it. But then later on, with our advocacy and learning from international experts like Venkat and others, we realized that the content of the bill was short of so many things in terms of minimum international standard. So we kept providing suggestions, we kept providing resources, we kept providing information as to how we will improve the content of the bill. And as we were doing this and engaging the duty bearers, or let's say those in authority, we were also engaging the people at the grassroots as well. So as the advocacy was going on, we were using both sides, the authorities and the citizenry. Although, I mean, some of these things are very technical and it's difficult for them to understand, but we ensure that as part of the process, we try to link the advocacy to things in the community that people can relate to. And therefore, as they do that, we empower them to also engage their legislator or their parliamentarian on the ground. So it will marvel you to hear some parliamentarian talking about the law on the floor of parliament and actually boasting that his constituents engage him on the law at the local level. So this is how come we're able to push through, because as we were pushing at the executive level or at the level of the authorities, we're also in pushing the grassroots people to also push out. So for us, it's a combination of the two. So we're pushing the grassroots to push for it. So this is how come we got this process to push through. Like Sandra said, it wasn't easy. I mean, at every stage in the process, the coalition had to initiate the process to move forward at every stage, at every point in time. Because even something that the first bill was drafted around 2008, but it was, 2002. And then the coalition was formed in 2003 when the first draft came out. So based on the coalition's effort and some of the engagement that we did, the bill only found its way in Parliament in 2010 after several engagements and several input that has been given to Parliament to ensure that, the executive, to ensure that the content before it's taken to Parliament is in line with the minimum standard, international standard and best practices. But some of these things, some of these engagements, when you engage and you provide the information and all that, you don't get them as it's supposed to be. You don't get them to be reflected on the document as is expected. So at every point in time, we kept pushing in exactly what we expect to see in the law. So as Sandra rightly said, the journey is almost to 2 decades. And one of the reasons is because the contents of the bill was not in good shape. And therefore, there were key things that CSOs were pushing to get those key things in the bill before it get passed. And then the second one, like I initially said, was the fact that because the early stages of the advocacy was heavily centered on the media, the advocacy, it became a challenge because people were not trying to come to support it because thinking that this is for the media, so why should I bother myself? I'm not a journalist, so why should I bother myself? So trying to get this out of the minds of the people was also a difficult task. And as we speak now, I think it's still in the minds of people, in the minds of some people, and we are finding it difficult to deal with that now. But like I said, with regards to the content of the bill, throughout the push, because there was even a point in time in the journey where government was ready to pass the law, but we came out strongly with several press conferences and statements and several programs on the public platform to go to advocate against the passage of the bill in that form. So government actually came out to try to tell the whole world that I am ready to pass the bill, but then your CSO says I shouldn't pass it. So, but we stood to our ground to ensure that whatever we are, because we realized that if we get the bill passed and it's not in a good shape, then it's not going to be useful, because we have examples of many bills in the country, like the Disability Act and all that are already in place, but they are not functional because of the clauses or some provisions that are not good in the law. So we realized that once we are going through this journey, we will ensure that we also don't get to that stage where we will rush and get it passed and it will just be on the table gathering dust. So our agenda was to push to ensure that the content meets the minimum international standard and best practice is recognized worldwide. And then, so fortunately enough, although for now, the law that is passed It's not, although, I mean, certain areas that we're expecting, we didn't get all of them. Most of the things that we're pushing for is currently in the law, which we are very proud of, because when you look at the the initial bill, and you look at the current bill, it is totally a different thing altogether, and due to the support or the campaign of CSO. So, like this CSO work, and the fact that it's nationwide, so it wasn't centered in the Accra, it wasn't centered in just the capital, but then try to involve the people at the local level as well, engaging their authorities at the local level also helps. So this is the journey, and like Sanjoy said, so we got a pass just last year. We are just 2 months back, government established the Information Commission, which the coalition had, we have engaged them once, as to how we can work together with them and support them. So for us, it is really a new era that we are in now. So it's good. I'm happy to be part of this program, because I'm learning in terms of the community practitioners and all that, picking up some of these strategies that some of the countries that have the law use in terms of the implementation that is now working well. So I think for now, I'll stop here and then continue if there any questions come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. It's always a pain to get unmuted or muted in this thing. I think the long journey of RTI in Ghana shows, I think, three qualities. One is patience among all of you who stuck with the story, solidarity, sticking together. And the third thing is real commitment, because I think many of you had a part, actually, if not the final draft which passed, but certainly had a part in negotiating the language of the law. And that, I think, was really unique, because when I saw that in front of my own eyes playing out, it was a great experience in democratic dialogue, the point that Kishali and Shuri had made just recently. I have one question to you before we actually have a 7-minute film on RTI and tackling corruption in Sri Lanka. The question is, people used to think this is for the media, so why should I be bothered? But now that you have an information commissioner, newly minted, and a law which is nearly 2 years old, over a year and a half, is the media aware that it can also use it? Does the media also use it, or is prepared to use it?
Yeah, of course, the media is very much aware. And then to prepare to use it is what I think for now, where we are now, we need to ginger the people, we need to push for the usage, the demand side as well, because when it comes to the pushing for the passage, the media played a key role. Although people thought that was just for the media, even at the latter parts, the media is one of the key agency that helped to push for Ghana to get this success story, the media. So the media is very much aware, and through that, so we even had a media coalition, which is like a subset under the RTI coalition, which have its own leadership and all that. So which also work with the CHRI, the Secretary of the Coalition, to push the agenda forward. So the media is very much aware and ever willing to use it. But now, the stage in which we are now is more about empowering them to use it, how to use the arts. That is where we are now. But as to whether they are willing to use, they are more than ever willing to use it, because they played a key role in getting it passed. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very, very clear answer. And because as a journalist, I'm very interested in media using RTI for, investigative stories or just good reporting, because we don't get enough of that. And it's interesting to hear you have a media coalition, because it's all about building capacity as much as anything else, and it'll be interesting to hear once we come to the Q&A and the closing remarks of panelists, how the media in India, in South Asia, has actually reacted to RTI, whether they've used them well or not. Kishali, of course, has an advantage in that she is both a commissioner and a columnist. So, Could we have the film, Shireen's film, please? And then we will go into the Q&A. So those of you who have questions to ask, put them on the chat box and we will respond. Thank you.
On the road to sustainable development, Sri Lanka provides an interesting case study. Free education and health policies have resulted in high youth literacy rates of 98.7% and high life expectancy of 75 years. Measured by its Human Development Index, Sri Lanka has historically been a high achiever in the region. However, decades of ethnic and civil conflict have undermined the full realization of these impressive social development goals. In a country that has been gripped by conflict in the past, with thousands of disappearances of people from all communities at one time, the rule of law has been more of a constitutional principle rather than being practically realized. Corruption has sapped the governance process. Institutional transparency and justice for victims have become increasingly unattainable. Transforming our world, the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by all UN countries and they serve as the international roadmap for development. The Right to Information Law, unanimously enacted by Sri Lanka's Parliament in 2016, is a prerequisite to achieving sustainable development goals. One of SDG's most significant commitments is Goal 16.
இந்த அரசாங்கத்தால் இந்த தகவல் அறியும் சட்டம் மிகவும் பிரயோஜனமாக இருக்கின்றது.
On the long road to recovery, use of RTI in remote villages and urban centers has empowered citizens to challenge the state. Mass movements have been created around issues of corruption.
The RTI law, as we refer to it, came out of a 15-year-old struggle in Sri Lanka. And it was enacted in 2016 August. Sri Lanka did not have a people-based RTI movement. It was a more elite kind of movement in the city. But the RTI law has been used very much by ordinary people in Sri Lanka in very remote places, in very remote parts.
In the area, அதாக கூடு கட்டி அதாக இருந்து அதாக குஞ்சு பொறிச்சு அதாக வெளியில பறந்து போகும். அதெல்லாம் இப்ப இல்லை. ஏனென்று பார்க்கக்குள்ள இதெல்லாம் இந்த டவர் இருக்கிறதால அந்த கதிர்வீச்சுக்களுக்கும் இதுக்கும் உள்ள பிரச்சனைகளால இதெல்லாம் பெருமட்டுக்கு அழிஞ்சு போயிட்டு அப்போ இப்படி இந்த இயற்கையான இதெல்லாம் அழியக்குள்ள இப்ப இதை கொண்டு இதுல வைக்க போகணும்ன்றத மக்களும் விரும்பல. பிறகுதான் காவலறியும் சட்டம் ஒன்று இருக்கிறது பற்றி நான் அறிஞ்சேன். நான் பிரதேச சபையில போய் ஒரு அப்ளிகேஷன் போட்டேன். விளையாட்டல் நிறுவனத்தோட தொடர்பு கொண்டு அந்த வேலையை இல்லாமக்கிட்டாங்க.
We have had instances where information release has led not only to the mere release of the information, but people challenging governance and government itself. A good instance recently in the North Central province, where there had been major corruption in the building of tanks and roads in that particular area. And because of RTI, because villagers filed RTI applications, they discovered the fraud, and the money was returned to government. The public officials were actually dismissed from their office and they built the tanks and the roads all over again. Now, this was a good example of the people coming together from a very remote area of Sri Lanka and actually getting on the streets and demonstrating and asking for things to be changed because of right to information.
Foundation එක දාලා නැහැ. කොන්ක්‍රීට් එක දාලා නැතුව ගහලා තියෙන්නේ. වතුර එන්නේ ඔක්කොම කඩාගෙන ගිහලා තියෙනවා. අරකට බලා ගන්න පුළුවන්. මලේ පාත් දාපු වතුර කඩාගෙන. අඟල් 4යි. ඒක දාලා ඉස්සෙල්ලාම දාලා තිබ්බේ අඟල් 4ක ප්‍රමාණයක් කොන්ක්‍රීට් එක. ඊට පස්සේ අඟල් 8කට ගණන්තය අඟල් 4යි. ඊට පස්සේ දැන් අපි අර RT පොමේ දැම්මට පස්සේ අඩියක් විතර ඇවිස්සිනවා මේ පස්සේ අවසාන කෙරවලට අඩියක් විතර පෙන්නලා තියෙනවා යාලා.
තොරතුරු දැනගෙන මේ පණත් නිසා අපිට ඇත්තම ඒ ටික හරි කරගන්න පුළුවන් වුණා. හොරෙන් ගන්න ගියපු සල්ලි රුපියල් ලක්ෂ 15ක් විතර අපි නැවත අර වැඩක් කරගත්තා.
இந்த மடுவம் கட்டின பொறால ஸ்டார்ட்ல இருந்து இந்த தூக்குப்ப மேல தான் இருக்கு. நடக்க ஏல போய் சாப்பிடு. இந்த நாத்தம் இருந்த தலைங்கட புள்ளையோட வாழ்க்கையும் சீரழிஞ்சிருக்கு. எங்கட புள்ளையோட வாழ்க்கை கல்யாணங்கள் வந்து கல்யாணம் மடுவ இந்த நாத்துக்கு இது ஆறு பண்றோம். இப்படியும் போய் அதுவும் போய் 2005ல இருந்து எம்பியை கூட்டிக்காந்து படத்துல காட்டத்தவங்க. எம்பியை கூட்டிக்காந்து படத்துல நித்தாட்டி நீங்க கொஞ்சம் இந்த நாத்தத்தை பாருங்கன்னு சொல்லி நித்தாட்டின மேடம் நான் நித்தாட்டினது பிறகு அதுக்கு பிறகு நாங்கள் இந்த மிஷின் அனுப்புகிறோம்னு சொல்லி அனுப்பவே இல்லை. அதை கவனிப்பார் ஒத்தரும் இல்லை மேடம். பிரதேச சபைக்கு ஒரு 25 கடிதம் வச்சு கொடுத்துருக்கேன். ஒன்றுக்குமா பதில் இது செஞ்ச வேலும் இல்லை விளக்கின வேலும் இல்லை அன்னாலும் போம்னு சொல்லி போட்டு இனி கடிதம் மட்டும் எழுதி நான் போட்டேன். நீ 12 நாளைக்கு கிடையாது பதில் ஒன்று வந்து கேட்டாங்க உங்களுக்கு இந்த வழி யார் காட்டி தந்த. நாங்கள் சொன்னேன் எத்தனை கடிதம் தந்திருக்கேன், எத்தனை எம்பிகிட்ட போயிருக்கேன், ஒத்தருமனைக்கு நடவடிக்கை எடுக்கணும். நான் அதில் நான் இந்த வழியில் இறங்கினேன் சின்னது நாள் சோறும் அவள் வாங்கின வண்டி அனுப்பி கொண்டே இருப்பாங்க. இப்போ எங்களுக்கு கொஞ்சம் நல்ல நாத்தங்கள் எல்லாம் நாத்தங்கள்லாம் குறவு, இப்போ எங்களுக்கு நல்ல குறவு.
And RTI became like this thing where you went to it for everything that you couldn't find. Normal service delivery, government permits, car permits, land deeds, whatever. It was basically, sort of seen as a panacea for many, many years in Sri Lanka, and people kept going to RTI Act and filing these requests. But we've handed down hundreds of orders up to now, and public authorities in Sri Lanka have actually complied with the Commission's directives. There's been no public authority that have said, we are not going to obey you, we are going to resist you, we are going to the Court of Appeal, we are not going to give you the information. They have not really said that. They have all complied.
Immediately we are sending the reply and everything. In the initial stage, we had some issues, nearly 1 year, then okay.
சில விஷயங்கள் பப்ளிக் இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட் இல்லாமல் பர்சனல் இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட்டுக்காக வேண்டியும் சில நேரங்களில் இன்ஃபர்மேஷன் தேவைப்படும்.
In Sri Lanka's deep south, villagers from Mathura explain how they use the RTI Act to stop sewage and wastewater flowing through their village. RTI has been a common point of activism for communities divided on racial and communal lines. It has brought the disempowered in Sri Lanka onto a common platform of fighting corruption and changing government policy. In a short period of time, the RTI regime has forced the guardians of public resources to be accountable. RTI, a law conceived in seclusion, has now entered the vocabulary of the grassroots.
I do have a question.
Yes, please.
First of all, just to say thank you to everyone. That was absolutely amazing and very, very humbling. It seemed to me demonstrably about the interplay of politics, individuals, the role of media in different ways, and of course that power from below. And across the world, we see a turn in different countries towards more authoritarian right-wing regimes. Hopefully, at least the election of Biden is a small window of light. And I wondered if anyone felt that RTI was under serious threat under these circumstances, whether the legislative basis of RTI, or is it too solidly adhered now, even if it continues to be complex and contested on the ground.
Right. Who would like to take that? Kishalay and Venkat. Kishalay, would you like to go first? You just need to unmute yourself. Yeah, thanks.
See, in Sri Lanka, well, we've had the law for 5 years, and I certainly would not say that it is sufficiently well entrenched, Emma, in a way that it can stand against very strong government onslaughts on the working of RTI, There will be issues, I think, if the government wishes to intervene in stopping the RTI process. But that's on the one side. On the other side, the fact that the people have been using it so strongly for the last 5 years has actually impacted on the government as well. Because, for example, the president's very frequent refrain that we hear is that public funds ought not to be wasted. And that, there must be checks on government on abuse by state officers of public funds. And right to information has actually been one of the key factors which has exposed and made this issue come out in the open in terms of making public officers nervous and scared about abusing the public funds that are given to them. So Shireen's example of the light bulbs is a very good story, and there are many, many more. Out of the decisions the Commission has given, the decisions that have most been appealed from to the Court of Appeal against the Commission are really 4 at the moment. And those 4 really go to the core points of corruption in Sri Lanka. So one is political corruption. That is one particular appeal was regarding the Commission order to disclose to the Prime Minister, to disclose a declaration of assets of the Prime Minister. The second and third information appeals that went to the Court of Appeal were in respect of state entities, high state entities, paying their executive officers huge amounts, colossal amounts of money, and hiring lawyers at colossal amounts of public funds, to appear to hide corruption cases in the courts. So all these go to the various core points of corruption in Sri Lanka, and it's interesting to see how that plays itself out really in the process. So I think it all depends on how the public stand up and fight for RTI. And I think that has been happening. It will happen hopefully in the future. And whatever authoritarianism that one will confront in one's workspace or one's environment, the best way one can meet that is through collective advocacy, collective action that really challenges head on that kind of movement. So it's all up in the air for Sri Lanka as far as we can see. Up to now, for 1 year, there has been absolutely no impact on the Right to Information Commission or the Right to Information process in Sri Lanka. We have proceeded without any interruption as we've been doing for the last 4 years. So what the future holds, of course, is it's difficult to predict at this time what will happen next year or the year after.
Sorry, I'd like Venkat to come in now. And Venkat, apart from this, would you also briefly touch upon the challenges that COVID has placed on RTI and the Information Commission? Because that is a very critical part of the whole process. How do you get access to information when there are such extensive restrictions for health reasons, and the infrastructure has been picking up to deal with the challenge, the IT and so on? But if you could deal also with that, and once you're finished, we will have the film that we've all been waiting for. Thanks, Venkat.
Okay, thank you. To start with, to respond to Dr. Maudsley's question, if I were to look at the context in which India's right to information laws implementation is today poised, I would not be a picture, because what we have seen over the last 7 to 8 years is a steady decline in the democratic process. Elections happen, but everything else after elections is hugely undemocratic. Be it the party hopping of elected representatives, be it the destabilization and the pulling down of on freedom of speech and expression, be it the restrictions on journalism, be it the outright influencing of free and independent journalism by corporate houses, be it the threats to self-expression of citizens, be it the state's absolutely negative and authoritarian reaction to dissenting views, everywhere we are seeing a decline. So it's but natural, or it's just concomitant, that RTI also takes a beating. However, just as Kishali pointed out, the one saving grace today is the people's support for the right to information law in India. People have not stopped using it. Even during the lockdown imposed by COVID related restrictions, people have filed information requests. I myself took a 15-day break from filing information requests, or 2 weeks during the first phase of the lockdown, when I realized that perhaps it's not the right time to ask information or questions from government because they're all busy fighting at the front line. So let's wait for some time. And then slowly, when the lockdown restrictions start getting raised, we started filing information requests, and that's true of many people across the country. Um, what is it that people have used the right to information for during COVID times? They've used it for those very issues which require more transparency in the public domain. For example, the COVID relief and rehabilitation packages for the most disadvantaged, the most vulnerable, and the most impoverished, the directly affected of segments of society. Food security related matters. The payment of ex gratia that was announced in a big way by government for various segments of society like migrant workers, widows, elderly, persons with disabilities, etc., etc. So a lot of probing is happening using the right to information. And there's something that we haven't talked about. Using right to information is not free from danger. It is a potential source of threat to the information requester. Now, we've had instances of people being attacked brutally. Some have lost their lives. I don't want to alarm people with figures here, but we have documented at least 420 plus cases of people being attacked, and that's happening even now. When people ask crucial information about how many families got the free rations that were promised by the government as part of a grand announcement of the COVID relief package, people got beaten up for simply asking why is it there aren't enough testing being done for identifying people who are infected by COVID. A whole range of such uses RTI has been put, and that is the most heartening part, that people have not resigned themselves to their whatever fate that they may portray for themselves until a vaccine is found for COVID, but they are at it. People face a lot of difficulties. Particularly, let me talk about the conflict zones in the country, particularly the northernmost part of India, Jammu and Kashmir. Since August last year, when the status of that part of India was changed constitutionally, they were reduced from a state to a unionly a territory administered by the central government directly. They had to face a lot of communication blockade. Postal department offices were not working. But what is it that people were asking, apart from the fact that they were shocked, they were reacting, they were trying to express dissent on social media, etc., etc. There were many people who knew about RTI who were wanting to find out what is the best way of filing information requests today. Where do we go? How do we do it? Can you help us get information? Because we are not able to do this in our own town because post offices are not open and we can't send our requests by registered mail or speed post, etc., etc. So that has been the most heartening of the experiences as far as right to information is concerned, that people have not given up on right to information. There are many people who are now asking questions about the COVID vaccine administration strategy across the country. How are district administration authorities preparing themselves? Who has been identified for priority vaccination? What is likely to be the cost? What kinds of vaccines have been tested in India? There are the entire set of professionals in the access to medicine sector, in that whole battle, where they are asking what kinds of clinical trials have you conducted, and what are the results, and who are the people who are being tested, for the efficacy of the vaccine. So RTI has really been, it continues to be used. Now, as far as information commissions are concerned, naturally, when the government machinery, except for the frontline agencies, the frontline workers, when it shut down due to the lockdown, the information commissions also stopped working. But that was also the time when organizations like ours, like CHRI, got into the act. My colleague is here as part of the participants in this event, our program officer Shikha Chibbar. So she did at least 3 or 4 rounds of telephonic surveys trying to find out whether the information commissions were open, whether they had created any special facilities for people to file in their urgent requests or to file in complaints about lack of access to crucial information regarding their life and liberty. So we published our results. That sort of acted as a fillip and kind of an impetus for the information commissions that were shut down to open up work, because they felt that they were being portrayed in poor light, that when information access is needed the most, particularly in these kinds of public health emergencies, they are not functional. So one by one, the website started becoming functional. They said, if you want urgent information relating to health or COVID-related facilities, this is where you need to send an email. Or if you have difficulties with accessing details about the COVID relief package distribution, then this is whom you need to contact, etc. So that way, the systems have started responding, no doubt. And I'm quite hopeful that in the coming months, we will actually get to know more about, we are actually waiting for the annual reports of information commissions about how RTI was used this year. Was there an increase in the numbers? Was there a decrease in the numbers, or has it been at steady state? So it's only next year that we will get to know how ubiquitously RTI has been used or not been used during COVID times. Uh, the last point that I wanted to say is that the fact that people have not lost faith in the right to information even during these difficult times is a big um, heartwarming thing to know about, and also something to build on, that if RTI can, the regime can survive and function in whatever manner. It may not be the best of times, but despite the fact that people, like, I know I have filed the most number of requests during this 4 to 5 month period, and I am getting responses. There are rejections as well, but that's part of life, where you don't get access to information because government thinks it's inconvenient to put certain information out in the public domain. Then you challenge it and you fight it all the way. And some information commissions have responded with great interest. They have given out of turn hearings to some of these urgent matters. Like, for example, one case was about disclosing in one place the COVID treatment designated hospitals across the country. This was not being done by the Union Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. The Commission got into the act based on a complaint and directed that everything must be compiled and made available on their website at the click of a button. Similarly, collection of information about migrant workers who were stranded in different parts because they were not able to go back to their hometowns due to lack of transport facilities, and they were not able to get work because the employers simply were not paying them, or work had come to a standstill. So even that data was made public thanks to the intervention of the Central Information Commission. Our commission moves only when it is moved by an individual. They do not have suo motu powers, but they have stood up to the challenge. And I must say that some of that is replicated in the states as well. It's only in the coming months that we will get to know how effective that the commissions have been, particularly when their annual implementation statistics are going to come out in the form of reports. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Venkat. I'm at a rather difficult situation here because we have just a few minutes and we actually have a film we wanted to show, and there are at least 2 or 3 questions in the Q&A, and I just wanted the panel's agreement that if we can go with the questions first, and then perhaps we can, if we run out of time, then we could perhaps share the video with everybody. I've seen the video. I think it's great, but I think it's very important that we should just enable this process to take the conversation to continue and take place. If that is okay with everybody, and is that all right? Is that okay?
Yes, I think that's.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay, so the first question is from Shailesh Gandhi, the former Information Commissioner in the Indian Information Commission. In India, women users of RTI are probably less than 10%. There is no logical explanation of this. For this, what is the gender distribution in Sri Lanka and Ghana? Because I think Ghana is still coming on board. Maybe Shireen and you'd like to take that.
Yeah, I'll take that on, because I mean, I can't say the national statistics, but I can talk about let's say even with an institution within the last 5 years, I mean, we have quite a number of requests that we have filed in the sense the community have filed, and then they are the percentage women file more than men. So in that sense, I mean, we should hear because I'm very sort of surprised, like in India, it's only 10%, whereas here it's much more, yes. But the reason is why, it's because also it's the kind of way, the people have taken on, and because of maybe I can also speak because we are working predominantly in the north and east, but in the south as well. But the community activism and all of that, this is happening at that level. So therefore, women are taking on those issues. But again, it's what type of request. There is also that you can sort of differentiate the kind of information like the men and women are requesting. So women are requesting what is affecting their day-to-day life, like, from light bulbs to what do you call, the distribution of some of the payments, and what affects, like, the family and the community. So major public sort of, like, issues, let's say road construction, on all of that, you see a bit more, like, the gender disparities there, the questions that, like, that they are going and asking. For example, at the district level versus provincial level. So if the questions are coming, the requests are coming at the district level, women, there is a pattern. Women are, like, women probably, like, ask more than the men. And then at the provincial level, probably it's different. But Kishali, I don't know, but from the commission statistics, how is it? But
yeah, I think the commission statistics really, many of the cases that come to us, the issues of individual promotions, employment, so on and so forth, it's more male dominated. So you get more males asking about their employment prospects, what's happened to them, and grievances in institutions, so on and so forth. And more questions come at the community level, or more appeals come to us from women, where the communities themselves are concerned regarding utilities, regarding environmental issues. And there are many, many case studies of that nature where women have filed appeals to the commission. From the farmers, for example, women predominate much more than the males. So I think it all, as Shireen said, it depends on who files the information request in the first instance. And if you categorize on that, there are certain percentages that vary according to the nature of the information request file.
Thanks for that, Shireen and Kishali. Esther, do you have anything to add before we go to the next? Would you like to add something before we go to the next session? The next question, sorry.
No, Sandra, but because like you rightly said, our own is pretty new. But now, with this, with regards to the coalition, what we are doing is that when we are pushing for requests, we do to ensure that we do for both men and women. So we have a group of people. We started with a group of people that we empower them to go and request for information. And then we deliberately ensure that women are also passed. So it's not just dealing with men, but then right from the beginning, we are trying to add the women to the process so that we'll get used to it. But I cannot talk about percentage and all that because it's pretty new, as you said.
You have the advantage of starting on a clean slate, so you can learn from everybody's mistakes and really make it robust and keep it that way.
Very true, Sandra.
Yeah. Now, this other question is from Supriya Roy Chaudhary about the idea of the nurturing a community of practitioners in Sri Lanka. What possibilities does the panel see for the curation of transnational community of practitioners, and what opportunities currently exist which can bring Southern practice activists together to encourage greater learning and exchange? I hope that perhaps Esther and Venkat, you can speak on this as also, but specifically since the first part of the question is addressed to the Sri Lankan experience and how that can be replicated or across geographies, I'd very much like Kishali and Shireen to come in, and then perhaps Esther and Venkat.
Yeah, basically from the commission side, Sanjoy, as you know, I think a lot of the strength for the commission has come precisely in the sharing experiences during the last 5 years. We have learned and we have collaborated a lot in South Asia, and our effort and our focus has been actually to always show the Asian experience in a way, because that has a lot more traction with our governments rather than if you point to practice in Canada or in the US or in the UK, for example. So the moment you point to practitioners in India, you point to practitioners in South Africa, you get a particular reaction from the government and from those in power that really allows you to manage that dynamic a little bit better than if you cite, for example, the global north in your sort of advocacy. So we use it as a tactic really to show that Sri Lanka's regime can improve and is trying to improve as we go ahead. So I mean, our collaboration has been across, from South Africa to India to Bangladesh, to Mexico, and that has been, I think, a very predominant and very strong factor in our improvement as we implemented the act from the Commission's part.
Yeah, and in addition, Sanjay, one of the things that initially, even the whole concept of community of practitioners rather than activists is also because we did a visit, because for us also from a CSO perspective, this was a new law, and how experience are shared and all of that. I remember taking a group of people from here, from Sri Lanka, about 25 to 30 of us, had gone to the South India. And at that time, the takeaway from that was this is the way that how they are actually filing requests and all of that. What we found was, you had RTI activists there, more RTI, the torchbearers of RTI, the few, when we called even okay, we want to meet a community in Madurai, or we wanted to meet a community, then they said, no, speak to this person, speak to that person. So that is also something that was a lesson and a takeaway for us as well. Okay, what we didn't want to do. So Priya, for answering probably your question is, yes, I think this is a way creating that community, probably a way forward is something that we can think about in a way how with other countries, the pros and cons, what's working and what's not working. And also creating these strategies for advocacy or to make it better. We are also definitely, after this commission goes, these commissioners leave, they are only, we are going to, because it all depends on, some law is important, but the people who are there also, it's very important. So if we have certain commissioners who are not interested, then definitely we are going to have an issue. So this is where probably we need to think about a strategy to create a sort of cross country, or in Asia Pacific region, probably community of practitioners. I don't know, something to think about. That's all I can say.
I think that whether the commissions are there or in a strong way or a weaker or indifferent way, civil societies need to be committed and engaged and work together across geographies, whether it's the Pacific or the Indian Ocean or wherever. Indo-Pacific is the new phrase in town. But I think that, I look at the communities of active participants, of active practitioners. I think that's really the key, not just activists. So very briefly, Venkat and Esther, if you would like to say a couple of sentences each, because we are coming to the close of the event and I don't see any other questions, but if you could address that last part about curating and expanding the community of practitioners across the globe, across the, for lack of a better phrase right now in my head, the South, not the best, but yeah.
Yes, of course. Very briefly speaking, it's certainly a good idea. That's how CHRI started with its interventions in the initial years of implementation on, in India. Our initial focus was on training the supply side, and then we realized that trainings were certainly happening, but then there wasn't enough demand, coming. So that's why we decided to focus more on the demand side, and rather than go and teach people at the community level, because we simply did not have the capacity to do that, we worked through the training of trainers mode, where we seeded the whole idea of RTI in a range of large network civil society organizations, hoping that they would go back and they would work with the people at the community level who would use RTI in their own ways. And in fact, that has really worked, because today in almost every state, I can identify people who will very fondly remember the fact that their first exposition to RTI procedures was in CHRI workshops. And believe you me, they have not stopped at 1 or 2 RTIs, but they have continued despite all the frustrations that they have faced in terms of accessing information. So there's a lot of value in bringing them together. A lot of that has happened organically. Almost every state has some kind of an RTI munch or the other, a platform where activists come together, talk to each other. I myself am part of at least about 10 different RTI WhatsApp groups where there's a lot of sharing of information, but it stays within the group. It doesn't expand to becoming something like a publicly accessible resource, the way some of the UNDP supported community of practitioners, used to function on watershed management or environment and other related issues. But all of that is a function of money available. The uniqueness about India's RTI activism, if I were to put it in double quotes, is that it is self-driven. It is not agenda-driven by anybody. It is not NGOized, nor is it projectized. And in fact, there is a lot of suspicion in India about NGOs which simply go and train other people to use RTI or even help them file RTIs, but do not do it themselves. Those who actually get their fingers dirty by seeking information and making it public are the ones who are respected the most. But I wouldn't say that this is the model that would work in other countries. But what is important is for these different kinds of practices, different kinds of developments, different kinds of innovations that have been that are visible across the countries, it's important to bring them all to a common marketplace, kind of, to use the World Bank's terminology, where the benefits, the pros and cons of these innovations, these methodologies can be shared, and countries which are poised to have their own RTI law or which would like to implement laws that have already passed would like to see what works for them best, or a combination of more than one methodology might work for them best. So it's certainly a good idea.
Right.
I'll stop here.
And I think, yeah, Esther, one sentence or two.
Yes, Sanjoy. So it's a very good idea because, like, as you know, I mean, we are new, so we are open to learn from all angles. So putting such a group together is very good. I mean, so that we'll also benefit from it. I think it's good. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think more of this will happen, more collaborations, more energetic participations, more solidarities, more learnings from each other across the geographies and across countries. And I'd like to thank all the participants and the organizers for making this possible, the panelists who've been wonderful and clear and stuck to time. As far as the film is concerned, I'm really sorry that we were not able to show it, but we will send it to all of you by email. And I'd like to now thank all of you again, but hand it back to Professor Maudsley. Thank you.
Very briefly, thank you all so much. That was incredibly fresh and informed, and so nice to hear in sometimes a rather dry academic world the realities and the connection and the fierceness of your passion and fight for this. So thank you very much indeed.